They say you can hear the breath of fate in the silence before a storm. In the summer of 1683, that silence hovered over Europe, and its breath reeked of gunpowder and dread. From the east came an ocean of men, 300,000 Ottomans, banners rippling like waves, cannons glinting beneath the scorching sun, steel boots pounding westward in the name of empire and vengeance. And at the heart of their ambition stood Vienna, half broken, half abandoned, yet stubbornly unbowed. We were no army, just 15,000 souls. Priests, farmers, old men with rusted swords, and soldiers too weary to pray. But we stood upon cracked ramparts, watching the smoke rise on the horizon, knowing full well what waited beyond. For 60 days, we did not sleep. For 60 nights, the crescent moon burned above us like a curse. And yet, we clung to our walls with bloodied hands, not to win, but to deny them their triumph. That summer, I learned something empires often forget: courage is louder than numbers. And in Vienna, we roared. They say time heals all wounds, but not in Istanbul, not in the heart of an empire that once reached from Persia to the gates of Vienna. In 1529, Suleiman the Magnificent had marched on this same city, confident, divine, unstoppable. But the rains came, the mud rose, and the Austrians stood. His dream sank into the soil along with 10,000 dead. That failure became a scar etched into Ottoman pride. And now, more than a century later, the empire returned, not older, not wiser, but hungrier. Sultan Mehmed IV watched from his golden halls, but it was his Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa, who carried the fire. A man not content with power, he wanted legend. He looked at Vienna and saw not a city, but a crown. "Let me take it," he told the Sultan, "and I will open the gates of Europe." The Sultan nodded, and thus, destiny was set in motion on old ambitions and fresh arrogance. A second wound would soon be opened, but only one side believed it would be the same city that bled. They came like thunder with no rain, a storm of men and metal that swallowed the horizon. From the east, they poured forth janissaries in crisp white turbans, Sipahi cavalry whose hooves tore the ground like drums of war, and Tatar horsemen screaming oaths to the sky. Behind them rumbled siege wagons, cannons, towers of powder and provisions. They were not an army. They were a nation uprooted, flowing westward like a tide sent by heaven. Kara Mustafa rode at the head, serene, iron-hearted, already imagining the Sultan's praise as he laid Vienna at his feet. In every step, there was more than strategy. There was pride, vengeance, the promise of empire. And the Christian world, fractured and bickering, could barely see them coming. France schemed against the Habsburgs. Catholics distrusted Protestants. No alliance, no warning, no shield. And so, the Ottomans marched not as invaders, but as heirs to a dream they believed the heavens had kept warm for 100 years. Vienna, they thought, would fall like a leaf in autumn. But some leaves, when pressed too hard, slice like blades. When the sky darkened with smoke and banners, and the wind carried whispers of war, our emperor turned his back. Leopold fled to Linz, taking his court and his courage with him. He left us with crumbling walls, 15,000 defenders, and a man whose name would soon become legend, Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg. He was no emperor, but he was iron. He looked at Vienna not as a burden to be saved, but as a vow to be kept. He sealed the gates, lit the beacons, and called every soul to arms. Blacksmiths became sentinels, priests carried powder, children ran messages between the bastions, while their mothers filled sandbags with shaking hands. The sound of hammers echoed through the streets like a heartbeat refusing to stop. On July 14th, they came rows upon rows of tents rising like ghosts across the plains, green banners rippling beneath the sky. At the center stood a pavilion, grand and patient. Kara Mustafa had arrived. That night, the air smelled of oil and fear. Fires glowed beyond the walls, and when the sun returned, it did not bring peace. It brought the first cannon blast, and with it, our siege began. The first cannon struck like a hammer from the heavens, splintering timber, shattering prayer, and shaking the bones beneath our boots. But Kara Mustafa wasn't here to burn Vienna. He wanted it whole, polished, glorious, a gift for his sultan, not a grave. So he ordered his men not to climb, but to crawl. His engineers dug like termites, tunneling beneath our walls, packing black powder into the belly of the earth. Each night, the earth whispered of death. You could hear it, the scrape of shovels, the muted clink of iron in darkness. So we dug too, blindly, desperately, countermines in the soil. Sometimes, we met them face to face in the deep. Torchlight flickered across eyes wide with terror. Hands clutched picks, knives, nails, anything. Down there, it wasn't war. It was hell. We fought in choking dust, where even screams died before they reached the surface. Every explosion from below cracked the city's spine, but we did not bend. Not yet. For every inch they stole, we stole back a heartbeat. We had no choice. The devil was no longer at the gates. He was under our feet. August came with heat and hunger. The wells turned sour. Bread turned to memory. Horses vanished from the streets, not stolen, but eaten. The smell of rot clung to every breath. Sickness bloomed in the alleys, and still the cannons roared, day after day, each blast carving away stone and hope. Yet no one spoke of surrender. Not once. Not while Starhemberg still walked the walls. I saw him, his coat soaked in blood from a musket ball to the shoulder, his face pale but eyes burning. He greeted soldiers by name, patted trembling boys on the back, nodded to mothers who brought water up the towers. "Hold on," he said, always the same words. "Help will come," even when he didn't believe it. And so we held, brick by bloody brick. Church bells still rang between the shells, not to mark time, but to remind us we were still alive. And beneath the rubble, beneath the silence between barrages, we prayed not for salvation, but for one more day, one more heartbeat. 'Cause in that fire, we found something fiercer than fear. We found faith. Outside our walls, Kara Mustafa waited not like a general, but like a sculptor staring at unfinished marble. He believed he was shaping legacy, not just war. His pride demanded surrender, not slaughter. He wanted us to kneel, not bleed. And so, he watched as his own army decayed. Men died by the hundreds each day, not from our bullets, but from heat, disease, exhaustion. Rain flooded his trenches. Mud swallowed his cannons. The smell of death crept even into their prayers. His commanders begged him to strike, to finish what he started, but the Grand Vizier would not. "They will break," he said. "They must." But we did not. Even as our walls crumbled, even as powder grew scarce and rations vanished, we stood. Every time they raised the crescent flag, we tore it down. Every time they surged forward, we bled, but did not yield. Pride is a sharp blade. It can carve glory or slit your own throat. Kara Mustafa was sharpening his to the hilt, blind to the gathering storm beyond the hills. Somewhere beyond the chaos, beyond the reach of our cannon smoke and shattered prayers, a message rode north. It crossed rivers, forests, borders, and fear. It reached a man who had faced the Ottomans before and beaten them, King John III Sobieski of Poland. He read our emperor's plea not as politics, but prophecy. If Vienna fell, the gates to Europe would swing open. There would be no Krakow, no Prague, no Christendom. "Vienna is the wall that protects us all," he told his nobles, his voice like iron striking flint. "If it falls, we fall with it." And so the banners were raised. Within weeks, 20,000 Polish soldiers thundered southward, joined by German and Austrian troops along the way. For the first time in a generation, Europe stood together not for crowns or borders, but survival. A holy league forged in desperation. And we, starving in the shadows of crumbling ramparts, had no idea they were coming. But deep down, some part of us still clung to the words Starhemberg repeated like a prayer. "Hold on, help will come." By early September, our world had shrunk to fire and stone. The Ottomans had breached outer bastions. We were down to inner walls narrow, cracked, barely holding. Men fought barefoot, their feet blistered and bleeding. Muskets misfired from damp powder. We shared water by the spoonful and meat by the bone. And yet, when the crescent banner climbed our towers, we pulled it down with raw hands and spit curses through broken teeth. We had nothing left but rage and memory. Then one evening, as the city groaned beneath another barrage, Someone saw it, a flicker, then another. On the northern ridge, small lights moved like stars being born in the woods. Some thought it was lightning, others a hallucination. But the bells began to ring wild, frantic, alive. We climbed the walls, mouths dry, hearts hammering, and stared into the hills. The lights moved in formation. Torches, hundreds, thousands. They were here, the army, the allies, Sobieski. And for the first time in 60 nights, the wind carried not smoke, but hope. The forest above Vienna stirred with a different kind of breath, a unity forged not in trust, but necessity. Germans, Austrians, Poles, and Hungarians. Men who once spilled each other's blood now marched side by side. They spoke in different tongues, bore different flags, but they shared one vow: Vienna must not fall. At their head rode a man carved by war, King John III Sobieski, 54 years old, his saber seasoned by Tatars and Ottomans alike. He met Duke Charles of Lorraine on the northern plain, and with a single handshake, sealed the alliance that empires had failed to forge for centuries. Their plan was bold: strike from the high ridge of Kahlenberg, catch the Ottomans where pride had blinded them. But to get there, they dragged cannons through thick woods, carved paths through wet stone, and marched by torchlight through valleys that devoured wheels and men alike. Priests walked among them, lifting crosses, chanting hymns that echoed between trees like the wind's answer to despair. And as the final hill rose, they saw it, Vienna, still burning, still standing, and down below, an empire too certain of its own victory. On the night of September 11th, the city held its breath. The sky was a black canvas torn by embers and cannon fire. Then flickers again, this time closer, brighter, undeniable. One of our soldiers on the northern wall shouted, then another, and another. Bells rang without rhythm, not alarms but cries of recognition. We climbed the ramparts, and there they were, lines of torches dancing through the dark trees. Not an illusion, not smoke, salvation. Inside the Ottoman camp, Kara Mustafa saw them too. At first, he thought it was a trick, a scattering of peasants or deserters. But then came the low rumble, like the growl of a mountain waking. Drums, horns, the thunder of hooves. And he knew the Christians had arrived, not in fragments, not as rumors, but as an army. His officers scrambled. Tents became trenches. The siege that had bled Vienna for 2 months was now about to burst open into something else, entirely a reckoning. While we stood atop crumbling walls, barely human, we felt it. For the first time in 60 nights, we were no longer alone. September 12th began with mist clinging to the hills like breath on glass. Below, the Ottoman camp stirred, drums pounding, orders shouted, thousands scrambling into armor, believing today they would finally breach Vienna. But above them, on the ridge of Kahlenberg, stood another war. Flags of Poland, Austria, and the Empire flapped in the dawn wind. Priests whispered final blessings, and at the front, atop a white charger, shone Sobieski, his helm crowned with eagle feathers, saber gleaming like a shard of sunlight. He raised his arm toward the burning city and gave the signal. The valley shook. From the left, Charles of Lorraine's Austrians surged down through the trees, slamming into Ottoman flanks. From the center, German infantry stormed the trenches, muskets blazing. Smoke devoured the hills. Screams folded into cannon fire. Janissaries fought like lions, rallying again and again. Every ridge, every ravine turned to mud and blood. And then, from our towers, we heard it, the gunfire, but not theirs. Ours. Not from below, but from above. We cheered, we wept, we fired our own cannons in reply. Vienna had been dying, but now Vienna was roaring back. By midday, the valley was a furnace. The Ottoman camp twisted in chaos, smoke, screams, the clash of steel against steel. Kara Mustafa, still cloaked in emerald calm, unleashed his final cards. Thousands of cavalry thundered toward the German center, hoping to break the alliance before the Poles could descend. And for a moment, it seemed they might succeed, until the sky answered. From the ridge came a sound that split the air, the horns of Poland, then hooves, then wings. Sobieski had waited for this moment. At his back stood 3,000 winged hussars, each draped in wooden wings that hissed through the wind like a storm of angels turned to wrath. Behind them, 20,000 more horsemen, the largest cavalry charge in Europe since the Middle Ages. With one word, charge, Sobieski led them down. The slope trembled, sunlight flashed off lances. They hit the Ottoman lines like a tidal wave of iron. No wall, no will, no empire could stand against it. In less than 30 minutes, the center shattered. The green pavilion of Kara Mustafa wavered in the distance. The siege had ended. Now came the fall. By sunset, the battlefield was no longer a camp, but a graveyard. Tents burned like funeral pyres, banners trampled. The Ottoman army, once proud and invincible, lay scattered in blood and ruin. Some fled, most fell. Kara Mustafa stood at the edge of his dream, now in flames, watching it unravel without a word. Inside our broken city, we heard its silence. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that follows a scream too long held. We emerged from rubble and ash, our clothes torn, our hands blistered, and looked out over the field. Vienna was no longer a city, it was a scar. Armor glinted in the dirt like shattered stars. The air stank of sulfur and death, and yet we were still here. Families crawled through ruins searching for names. Priests walked the streets, blessing the fallen, whispering their names into the wind. And when the bells rang that night, they did not weep, they roared. Sobieski rode through our gates, his armor dulled with dust, eyes heavy, and we knelt. He dismounted, embraced Starhemberg, and whispered, "It was your courage that held until we came." Far from the ashes of Vienna, in the halls of Buda, the Sultan received the message. His hands trembled as he read, not because a city had resisted, but because an empire's illusion had shattered. Kara Mustafa, the man he had entrusted with Europe, had failed. There was no trial, no defense, only a silken cord, a quiet symbol of royal judgment. The Grand Vizier, who once commanded 300,000 men, wrapped the rope around his neck and bowed to silence. His death marked more than an end. It marked the collapse of a centuries-old ambition. The Ottomans would never again reach so far, and we rebuilt, brick by brick, grave by grave. The walls rose again, but the scars remained in stone, in memory, in the stories mothers told their children when the bells rang each September. Sobieski returned to Poland, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian. In every church across Europe, candles burned for Vienna. The tide had turned. From that day forward, Europe no longer cowered at the edge of empire. It stood, it united, and it rose. Some battles win land, others shape history.